Well, good morning, everybody. We are so thrilled to be here, Vicki and I, to come to North Star Community Church, to be with our friends, Pastor John and Shannon. What a fabulous building. This is a great facility. I mean, relationship rehab. I don't know if you guys watch Rehab Addict, all the different DIY shows on all that. And I just love, Vicki and I love what we feel in this room and in this building. And I think the miracle behind getting this building, the facility, is just fabulous. And we're honored to be here and to teach into this series that you guys are involved in. And we're going to talk about parenting. And parenting, for those of you that are parents, those of you that are grandparents, those of you that one day will be parents, those of you that are a child who has a parent, it pretty much involves all of us today as we talk about this incredible relationship and responsibility that we have. And again, raising kids is it's difficult, it's challenging, and we face a number of different things, but it is the most important responsibility that we have. Because these little human beings that God has put in our charge have a mind of their own. How many would raise their hands and say, yeah, how do we get those little human beings to go where they're supposed to go, do what they're supposed to do, not touch what they're not supposed to touch? It's almost like the very moment you say, don't do this, that's exactly what they're doing. And we want to speak into some of that. We consider parenting to be the most incredible responsibility that God has given to the two of us together, and we're grateful to maybe share a few things along the way. I can't really quite see the screen over there, but parenting with the end in mind is the concept of what we want to talk about today. But parenting has its struggles, and maybe some of you as parents need a little technique, and there is a little technique that you can buy on eBay, you can buy it on Amazon. If you show that next screen, I think that the next thing, if you just keep going one more time, there it is, right there. You can get this on Amazon. It's called the Get Along shirt. All right? If you got two kids that are kind of at each other, you just put that one shirt that's that would be a good technique. Can you guys even see it over there? Okay. Well, it's awesome. The Get Along shirt. And I don't know if you as a mom or a dad have lost your mind. And in losing your mind, you lost a child. Go to the next screen, and I think I might have to read this for you. Mom, where are you? Your daughter or your son texts you, and you say, well, I'm leaving Walmart on my way home. Why, sweetie? Well, Mom, you brought me with you. Oh, darn. I'll be there in a minute. Vicki, say something to these fine people as we kind of get rolling here.
Well, we are super excited to be with you. We have raised 4 children, 3 sons, 1 daughter. And they are all grown. Our 3 sons are married. Our daughter is still single. But we have been in your shoes. We are now grandparents. And that is the most awesome thing. We do have a picture of us and our 3 granddaughters. Our first grandson is on the way in April. And we are excited to keep adding the children to our family. It's expanding and growing, and we love it, love it, love it.
So our oldest lives in Miami with his wife, and they're the ones that are going to be expecting our very first grandson in April. And so the Graham name is going to continue on to the next generation. Our next oldest son and his wife, they live in Minneapolis, and they have 2 daughters, Adley and Ivy. And then our next son and his wife live in Bismarck, North Dakota, and they have another granddaughter of ours. Her name is Honora. And we're proud of our boys and the girls they picked to marry, and then our daughter who is looking for Mr. Right, and we'll find him in due time. All of our children are serving the Lord in a local church somewhere for the Lord. And of course, both of us have this call into ministry, and so we raised PKs, and it wasn't always easy, challenging. The challenge of parenting is a very real thing. But actually raising your children in the bubble of a local church can be even more challenging. Fortunately, Vicki and I were blessed to always be in churches like North Star Community Church, where you love Pastor John and Shannon, and you love Pastor Bethany and her husband, and you love the staff, and you love those children that they have, and you know that those children don't have to be perfect. their moms and dads have to be perfect, but the children don't have to be perfect. And we had a church families that really allowed our kids to be kids, and they didn't have a warped sense of expectation placed on them by other people in the church. And as a result, our kids, they made it. But it was touch and go. It was dicey. And part of our presentation this morning is going to involve one particular story regarding one of our kids that it was touch and go, related to if this child was going to respond to the intentionality that we wanted to put into being parents, because that's what we want to talk about this morning. Is the most strategic principle in parenting is to do it with the end in mind, is to parent your children in a way that you're always thinking about the end result, the outcome, the end, the end. And it's not just, can I get them through their teen years and not, do something that will, land them in jail, or, have a consequence that lasts a lifetime. It's more than that. And of course, the ultimate end in parenting is to raise your children so that they will have their own relationship with God, their own connection to Jesus, their own spirituality. And it gets even more challenging as pastors, raising your kids, because they're raised in this spiritual environment where they sometimes feel like this isn't even real life. But God has helped us, and our kids are all serving the Lord. And it's kind of a testament mostly to what Vicki did in the parenting years. But she trained me also to be a good dad along the way. And intentionality is really, really what we want to talk about. Parenting on the fly is convenient, but parenting on the fly, making it up as you go, there's some aspect, there's some truth to that, but we see a lot of parents that really are not even thinking much beyond just the current crisis that they might be in with your kids. Or if they're little and they haven't really created any kind of a mess yet, you're still not thinking beyond the end of your nose. And we want to encourage you to do that. And we're going to focus on three things in this talk with you this morning. That good intentional parenting with the end in mind, involves establishing family values, establishing good role models, and then establishing what we would call this authentic faith. When we talk about family values, you have to be clear to your children, with your children. You need to talk together as a husband and wife, or if you're a single parent, having an understanding of what do we want our family name to be known for. That's a family value, and establishing into your children that here's what we expect all of us to live by in terms of values. That would be family values. And then role models. How do we as a mom and dad, how do I as a single dad or as a single mom, how do I create the proper role model for my child to aspire to model their life after? And then authentic faith. Where does God fit in? Let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 6. And I want to read verses 1 through 9, and that launches us into this teaching today. Deuteronomy chapter 6, 1 through 9. These are the commands, decrees, and laws the Lord your God directed me to teach you to observe in the land you are crossing the Jordan to possess, so that you, your children, and their children after them may fear the Lord your God as long as you live, by keeping all his decrees and commands that I give you, and so that you may enjoy a long life. Hear, Israel, and be careful to obey, so that it may go well with you, and that you may increase greatly in the land flowing with milk and honey, just as the Lord, the God of your ancestors, promised you. Verse 4, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home, and when you walk along the road, when you lie down, and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your homes and on your gates. Lord, bless this message that Vicki and I share with this wonderful church family. We pray in the name of Jesus. Amen.
So today we begin with the end in mind, which means we have to be intentional about where we're going. We have to know where we're going to go, because we can't reach a destination if we don't know how to get there. So there's some pre-planning in parenting. We want to know the outcome of what our children are going to be like as an adult, and we have to work towards that end. So we have to clearly define what our family values are. So our first point is establish family values. You want to know what those values are. You need to determine them in your home, and you need to clearly communicate them with your children. Now, something we used to do was we used to attach our last name with our family values. In teaching our kids, this is what the Grahams do. And we would give them examples. I'll give you an example. We would say Grahams are leaders. We wanted our kids to all be leaders. And so we would say, you are a Graham, Grahams are leaders, and this is what leadership looks like. And so we would look for opportunities to encourage that, to enforce that. And we might say, oh, wow, Kyle, I loved how you said hi to Mr. Dolan today when we were at church. You looked him in the eye, you shook his hand, you were so kind, and that is a leader. Great job. And so we enforce those family values attached to our last name. Another example would be, because Graham's our leader, the next time the teacher asks, who would like to go first in sharing their report in class? You should volunteer and be the first one to go, because that's what leaders do. So you can see when we have a family value in our home, we can attach it to our last name. This is just who we are. And they become to understand, oh, this is what it looks like to be a leader. And they begin to view themselves as leaders. And all four of our kids are leaders today in the aspects of their jobs. So whatever family value you uphold, whether it's honesty, integrity, generosity, kindness, whether it's common courtesies, whatever it is, speak those things to them and encourage them along the way, and they will begin to see themselves that that's a part of who they are.
See, what we want to do is we want to attach this natural sense, I think, within all children, and that is to have pride in who they are and where they come from and in their family name. And so as you think about this as parents or grandparents, you might even think about, what is it that I'm proud of related to our family name? What am I proud about related to how my dad lived or how my mom lived or how my grandparents lived? What are those characteristics that you might resonate with, that you've tried to emulate, that your parents passed on to you? Be intentional about identifying those qualities and those characteristics as you pour into your sons and your daughters, because they will want to aspire to the family heritage or the family characteristic. And as you identify them, you're helping your children to just naturally rise, to live out, oh, that's what makes us special. That's what makes us distinct. As Grahams, insert your own last name, and then you kind of fill in the blank, and your children will rise to it. One thing that we also want to encourage along the lines of these family values is to understand the concept of age-appropriate freedoms. See, what we're trying to do with our children, especially in the young ages, we're trying to train the behavior. We're trying to train the right behavior that's based on good quality values. And sometimes parents misunderstand the concept of freedoms, and they parent outside the funnel. If you show the next slide, it's the picture of the funnel. We want to encourage you to parent inside the funnel. Now, as you see, on the top side of the funnel, it's very wide, and that would represent lots of freedoms. The wider the funnel would be more freedoms, and that would be in the upper teen years of their life. But when you have smaller children, you want to parent them tightly at the bottom part of that funnel where there aren't as many freedoms. The idea is our children are growing upward. They're starting in the soil, they're growing upward, and as they grow upward, they're given more freedoms as they get older. We want to avoid being the kinds of parents that give small children freedoms beyond what they're capable of handling. The scripture helps us to understand that when it talks about the foolish person who is wise in their own eyes. When children given freedoms beyond what they're capable of handling, they have this sense of autonomy, this sense of freedom, this sense of I know what's best for me. And parents often buy into that in the sense that I want my child to not hear me say no too much, because I don't want their psyche to be all negativized by me always saying no. No, children when they're really young need to hear mom and dad say no, and then as they grow, as they develop, as they mature, we're allowing them to have a few more freedoms as their age allows them to do. This is all a part of training your children to the family values.
A common mistake that parents make is giving too many choices too early. And when we give a lot of choices to the kids when they're in the preschool years, what happens is they think they are in charge. And so parents will say, when the child wakes up in the morning, "Hey, honey, would you like orange juice this morning or would you like milk?" And the child will choose. And then, "What would you like it served in the red cup or the blue cup?" And then they might ask, "Hey, would you like eggs or would you like them scrambled? Would you like a hard-boiled egg? What kind of egg do you want?" And then it gets to be nap time, and, "Honey, why don't you go choose a book?" And then when it comes time for something that they have to do, that you need them to do, and then you try to make them do that, like it's nap time now, go lay down, it's time to go to sleep, they throw a fit. Why? Because they have made all of the decisions up to that point in the morning, and they have been in charge. So how dare mom and dad tell me now what to do when I have been making all of those decisions up until this point? And so we need to limit the choices. Choices are not wrong, they're not bad, but we give them more and more choices as they grow older, and we understand that they can handle those choices. But in those early years, we don't give them as many choices because they become wise in their own eyes. And so we need to help shape them, mold them, because we want them to learn obedience in the early years so that we don't have problems in the teen years. Because what happens is a lot of parents flip the funnel upside down. They want to give their young child, lots and lots of freedoms, and we don't want to upset the apple cart. Nobody likes tantrums, so we just give in and let them kind of have their way. What harm is it? They're only 2. And so we think it's no big deal. But then the consequences and the risks become higher when they're teenagers, and all of a sudden it's a threat to our family, some of the behaviors that are going on. And so then we put the squeeze on them as teenagers and try to control them, and it's a nightmare. And then we have rebellious teens. So we get the funnel upside down, and we have to start it the right way and have tight boundaries in the beginning and loosen up as they grow. And once they learn obedience in those early years, you won't have the typical rebellion and outlandish behavior in those teen years when they've learned obedience in the younger.
Family values are difficult to establish if we're flipping the funnel upside down. Here's a verse. Ecclesiastes 8:11 says, "When the sentence for a crime is not quickly carried out, the hearts of the people are filled with schemes to do wrong." If we don't correct our children today, in other words, the younger children, a tight funnel, there's restrictions, there's boundaries, there's a lot of saying no. There's a lot of, no, mommy, no, daddy is going to make the decision on that. If we don't correct the children today, then what we're going to have is some more consequential challenges down the road, especially when they move into their teen years. Proverbs 26, verse 4 and 5 says, "Do not answer a fool according to his folly, or you will be like him yourself. Answer a fool according to his folly, or he will be wise in his own eyes." That phrase, wise in his own eyes, is a warning. Actions can lead children to think themselves wise in their own eyes. Children think that they possess a type of self-sufficiency, a self-autonomy, when early on moms and dads have allowed them to make all of their minor decisions, as Vicki mentioned, whether it be what they eat, what they wear, what they're going to do for the day. Proverbs 26:12 confirms this. "Do you see a man wise in his own eyes? There's more hope for a fool than for him."
The second thing we want to share about beginning with the end in mind is to establish role models. Parents, you are role models. Grandparents, you are role models. Aunts and uncles, you are role models, okay? Every single person in this room is a role model in some way to children that you have a relationship with. And so we want to role model. Probably the most important thing we want to role model is how to love our kids. We need to learn to love them the way God intended. I love this verse in 1 John 3:18. It says, "Dear children, let us not love with words or tongue, but with action and in truth." Some families are really good about saying, "I love you, I love you, I love you," but it's not really a verb. Kids have to see love in action before they understand how much they are loved and valued. And so it's our responsibility as parents and grandparents to love our kids in such a way that they truly know that they are loved, because that is the connection ultimately to God, their Father. And so we are their authority who can show them the proper love at an early age. So we want to give an example of what loving your kids in a very practical way can look like.
Love has to come through a relationship. Love has to come through a connection. Love has to come through something to where the children not only hear mom and dad say that they love you, but they actually feel mom and dad's love. So a very practical thing that we would encourage all families to reinstitute in the family schedule, which would be called family dinner, eating meals together. That has kind of gone by the wayside because of the fast-paced life in which we live. In many, many cases, both mom and dad are working full-time, and meal preparation and sitting down to meals. Kids are in soccer, hockey, baseball, band, and eating together has become something that you have to fight for. And the reason we would use this as a practical tool to be a role model for your children by loving them, helping them to feel your love, is because the dinner table becomes that time and place on a daily basis where you are able to communicate with your children, where you are able to insist that the phones are not coming to the dinner table. Back in the day, before we had, all cell phones and smartphones, we had answering machines. And I can remember people calling the pastor, and I'd say, it's going to go to the answering machine. We're not going to pick it up because the meal time is our time to connect. And so we were role modeling for our children that there are some times and seasons where it's just going to be us, and we will not be interrupted. If it's an emergency, we're going to be able to take care of that in due time. So family meal time is very, very important. It gives you the opportunity to make eye contact with your children. It's a time for relaxed conversation. It might be a time where you might even have a family devotional. You might read a scripture. You might talk about your day. Even moms and dads at the table talking to each other at the dinner table about their day with those little ears in the cornfield listening. It actually gives them the role model of what a family dynamic looks like as we eat together. The TV is not on, the phones are not ringing, all the digital media is put aside, and we're actually sitting down and eating together. Mealtime has to be a priority. It creates a sense of emotional intimacy among a family where we're able to talk and we're able to share together. Studies have shown, and these are studies that have been done not by Christian people, but by secular researchers. They have found how beneficial family mealtime is. Studies show that families that more often eat together, children are less likely to smoke, drink, do drugs. Children are less likely to get depressed. Children are less likely to develop eating disorders. They're less likely to consider suicide. Children who are in families where they eat together on a daily basis are more likely to do better in school, delay the decision to be sexually active. They're more likely to eat their vegetables, because, if kids are on their own, they're not going to eat their vegetables. They're more likely to learn big words. Why? Because they're listening to adult conversation. And they're more likely to know how to use the fork and the knife. It's my pet peeve, and my children will tell you that dad was always on the children how you use the utensils. Because I was trained by a dad who said, this is how you hold the fork and this is how you cut your steak.
So there are some great benefits, side benefits, just to note about having dinner together. A couple of those things are prayer. This is a great opportunity to allow your kids to hear you role model prayer, but it's also an opportunity for them to begin praying out loud in front of people. I can't tell you how many adults I have met who are uncomfortable praying out loud in front of people. But if they were allowed as a child to pray out loud around the dinner table, they wouldn't have that uncomfortableness about praying out loud. And so that's a huge benefit. And so praying at the dinner table is great. And another side benefit is manners, teaching your kids manners. Please and thank you, and wiping their mouth and chewing with their mouth closed and holding their utensils properly, not interrupting, asking permission to leave the table. There's so many good benefits that they learn around the table in that one simple exercise.
So do we want to see the potential in our children develop to its fullest potential? And the answer is yes. How do we develop the potential that lies within the children? We have to see it through unconditional love. We have to draw out this potential that is in these human beings by showing them unconditional love. Now, unconditional love should never be confused with non-consequential love. Okay? It is not love. A lot of parents think that they're really loving their children by rescuing them. I'm showing love to my kid by assuming my kid will never do wrong. It is not loving to assume that your children are perfect. They're not perfect. Now, they look like little angels, but they have something inside of them that is called the human nature to disobey and to not do the right thing. That is a part of the fallen nature. And so we need to love our children, and love is, as 1 Corinthians tells us, love means being patient, means being kind. It means not being irritable or rude. It is not holding a record of wrongs and labeling our child the wild child. Love doesn't rejoice in injustice. It never gives up. It never loses faith. Love is always hopeful, and love will endure through every circumstance. Our communication around the dinner table and in the car and wherever it is that we're connecting with our kids is to communicate in words and in action and in lifestyle. I love you no matter what, and I will love you no matter what. There are going to come situations where your child will fail, and that failure will cause them to think, will mom and dad still love me?
So I'm going to share a story about one of our sons that got derailed in high school. This particular morning, Doug left early for Chicago in a car, and we lived about 5 hours from Chicago. And he was going to spend the night in Chicago and fly out the next morning on a trip to Africa, and he was going to be gone 3 weeks. So he had left early in the morning to get in the car, drive to Chicago. I happened to be driving a school bus at that time, and so I was just had finished my morning route and was on my way home. And on the bus, the dispatcher contacted me and said, Vicki, where are you at? Are you almost home? And I said, yep, I'm almost home. And they said, the assistant principal of the high school is trying to contact you. It is very important that you contact him as soon as you get home. And I said, okay, I will do that. So immediately I start praying, because in a moment like that, you know that something serious has happened. I'd never met the assistant principal. I didn't know him, and he's trying to contact me. Obviously, it's about one of my children, and we had 2 sons in the high school at that time, and I knew immediately which son would be in trouble. You know, parents just have that inclination which child is going to have a problem, right? And so I began praying for that particular son, and not knowing what I'm praying about for sure, but I just said, God, I'm going to need your help, because Doug is not here by my side. I am going to have to handle this, whatever it is, and so I'm going to trust you, God, to be with me and to help me be a light in this situation. And so I got home, I called the assistant principal, and he said, I just want you to know that we have your son in custody. He has gotten into some serious trouble. There's been some stealing that's been happening this week, 3 days in a row. And so we actually set a trap, and we caught him, but it took him 2 hours to confess that he actually did it, even though we know that he did it, and we could prove to him that he did it. So this was the root of deceit that was in our child, and from a very young age, he would always give us half-truths. It just was like pulling teeth to get the whole truth out of him. He just had this deceitful nature in him. And it wasn't intentional to bring harm. It just was who he was. Did we correct? Did we discipline? Yes, we did, and consistently and constantly. And I never would have thought that he would have stooped so low to do something like he did. But yet I wasn't surprised because he had this nature in him. And so I said, okay, what are the next steps? And he said, well, a police officer is going to bring your son home because it is our understanding that he has hidden the things that he's stolen in your home. And so are you going to be home? And I said, yes, we're going to bring your son over. We're going to retrieve the things, and then we need you to come back to the high school because we need to talk about what we're going to do with your son. And I said, okay. So I then hung up and I began praying again. Oh, God, help me in this situation again. This was before cell phones, so it's not like I can pick up a cell phone, call my honey, and say, hey, guess what our son did? And so I'm just relying on the Lord to give me the strength, to give me the wisdom to know how to handle the situation. It wasn't long. The police officer drove up in our driveway, and he pulled our son out of the back seat in handcuffs, brought him through the front door, and there's nothing that will sink a mama's heart like seeing that of your son when you have no idea that that was happening. So he brought him through our door, and he said, tell your mom where the stuff is and she can get it. And the police officer actually started questioning me because that's typical of, do you know that your son does this stuff? Do you know how rotten he is? And just was really, kind of giving me the business. And I mean, this is the first, he's never been in trouble in school like that ever. And this is high school. So I'm like, I don't know. I'm sitting there stunned myself that he's done this. Well, I caught a glimpse of my son's eye. He did look me in the eye a couple of times, and I could tell he was just broken and very remorseful. And he told me where the stuff was hidden. He had actually hidden some money and some gift cards in our kitchen, of all places, which I live in the kitchen. But he had hidden it really well, and I was able to pull it all out, give it to the police officer, and he said, you need to come back to the school office and we need to talk about this. And I said, yes, okay. So he took my son back. I got in my car, went to the high school, and I'm going to tell you what happened in that principal office in just a few minutes. But I want to go now, jump to the end, because this has to do with the example of loving your kids. When I went home after the principal's office, and my son came home a little bit later because he was suspended for 5 days, and so he had to be given all of his homework and his assignments. The police officer brought him home the second time, and I was there waiting for him. And soon as he came through the doors, we just hugged each other, and we both wept. Wept, cried. Finally, we got composure, and I said, sit down. You and I have to talk. And I began to explain to him in a very kind, loving way. I could have been angry. I could have been yelling and screaming. I could have been just so upset. But the Holy Spirit had been working on me. God had been softening my heart to handle him in the right way, because I wanted to handle him in a way that he wouldn't rebel, that it wouldn't make him worse, but it would actually help him be better. And so I began to explain to him about this deceit in his heart since he was a little boy, and I gave him several examples of what he'd struggled with over the years. And I said, this is not a huge surprise to me. I don't like it. And I wish you'd never done it, but it's not huge because you have sin in your heart that you've never fully, completely dealt with. And so I want you to know, as your mom, that I love you. No matter what you do ever, I will love you. Why? Because Jesus loves me. Jesus gave his life for me, and I will do the same for you. So if you go to prison, if that's the choice you make, and you continue to live this lifestyle, I will visit you in prison. Why? Because I love you. I don't like it. but I love you. And that's what Jesus would do, and that's what I will do as your mother. But I believe that God's plan for your life is better, because I had known since he was a little boy that God had called him into ministry, and I knew that God was going to use this boy in great ways, and the enemy was out to destroy him. And so I shared all of that with him, and I said, son, do you want to know why you got caught? And he looked at me, big eyes, and he said, why? And I said, because that is how I pray for you. I have always prayed for you that your sin would find you out, that you would never be allowed to live with sin in your life. And I said, as long as your mother is alive, as long as I have breath in my lungs, I will always pray that prayer for you, which means you will always get caught. There's no hope of you ever being able to continue to live in sin and do wrong, because you will get caught. So you can choose that life, but that life is going to end you in prison, guaranteed. Or you can choose today to change your life and choose to live for God. But that is an example of loving your kid in the hardest moments. And then I prayed a prayer of blessing over him.
So I hope that you're able to see from this story why we're building this talk on being intentional and crafting family values. Our son totally violated a family value. But his mother was in a situation where she was able to grab composure to realize that here's an opportunity for her to role model what it means to be a loving parent. Love does not mean non-consequential response. There was going to be consequences, but there is that clear communication of what it means to be a Graham. And when you violate it, I'm still going to love you. Now let's go to the last point, because we got about 10 minutes before we close. And that is, we need to, along with establishing our family values, along with establishing good godly role models as a parent, we need to establish an authentic faith. God, our Father, not only loves us unconditionally, but he disciplines us when we need to be disciplined. Proverbs 19:18 says, discipline your children, for in that there is hope. Do not be a willing part to their death. And now you're starting to hear from this story how Vicky is kind of actualizing this particular proverb. And what she says when she goes back to the high school is actually a fulfillment of this concept, because of how she's going to respond to what the police officer is recommending for our son's punishment. Why do our children need discipline? Why do our children need to face their consequences? It's because our children have a sin problem. But it's not just our children. We all have a sin problem, and that's what parenting really is all about. We are dealing with a sin problem. That's what parenting is all about. You don't train your children to be sinful or to be devious. It's just inside of them. We have to do the opposite. We have to train godliness. We have to train responding to authority. We have to train these things. That's why we talk about parenting inside the funnel. The real truth is that every one of our children and every one of us as parents are sinners. All of us have sinned. We've all fallen short. And so our kids, born with this propensity to lie or to hit or to deceive or to steal or be unkind, they're selfish by nature. They want to hoard what's given to them. It's just part of their regular life as being a human being. And so we are in the process of turning. I was thinking about a movie analogy. How many of you are old enough to remember the Bad News Bears? You know, that baseball team of misfits. But that well-trained, they actually win. They become these all-stars. Or maybe the Mighty Ducks series. These misfit kids, but they're well-coached, and they actually turn into be not only great players, but they turn into be contributing human beings to society. And that's what we are doing. That's what God has called us to do. But we can only do it with the help of God. And so this authentic faith is so, so important to us. We don't want to see our kids, we don't want our kids to have the feeling like they are a problem too big for us to love or too big for God to turn around. And so Vicky's going to conclude the story with our son that wraps up this whole concept of what it means to establish authentic family values, godly role models, and authentic faith.
So I'm going to take you back to the assistant principal's office where I met with the police officer and the assistant principal, and they had already come to their conclusion of how they wanted to handle our son Kirk. And so they recommended that our son be locked in juvenile detention center for 5 days. That's what they had planned. And I quickly admitted, I said, you know what? My son is capable of anything. He's always had a deceitful nature. It's not a huge surprise that he could do something of this nature. So I let the principal know that, you know, I'm not against you. I'm for you. And I said, I want my son to have the strictest consequences that you can give him for the crime that he's committed, because I don't ever want him to do this again. Now, I sat there saying that through tears, because that's a hard thing to say for a mom, because you don't want to see your kids struggle. You don't want to see them go through suffering and heartache. But I know that pain actually a lot of times brings transformation. So I said, I need you to give him the most severe consequences for his crime so that he will not ever want to do this again. At that moment, the assistant principal sat back in his chair and he took a deep breath and he just sat there quietly. And I thought, oh dear, what did I say? I was a little nervous. And then he sat forward and he said, I have never had a parent say that to me, ever. I have parents who sit where you're sitting and they defend their child. You could easily say your son has never done anything like this before, and that is true because I've looked at his school record. He's never done anything like this before. First offense. You could say, let's let him off a little easy. This is the first time. You're not saying that to me. No parent has ever asked for me to punish their child. That tells me that you are a parent who will correct your child in the proper way. And then he began to look at my son and he began to speak life over my son. And to me, I'm sitting there and I am saying, this is God. This is God. He began to say, Kirk, I believe that I will shake your hand on graduation day, and this will not even be in either one of our memories. I believe that you are going to succeed and you're going to do great things, and I don't think you're ever going to be a problem here at the high school ever again. And he just began to speak life over my son, and I knew that was God in that moment. And he said, I'm changing my mind. You're not going to juvenile detention center because you have a mom who will correct you and will make things right in your home. And you don't need to go there because actually it might harden your heart because this is your first offense and it actually might cause you to become worse, and I don't want that for you. And so I'm going to send you home with mom. And in my mind, I'm going, oh, dear Jesus, please help me to have the right consequences so that he won't do this again. And I questioned him. I said, are you sure that's the right thing? And he said, yes, I am sure. And it's like, okay. So I left his office and I thought, okay, God, now you've got to help me. You've got to help me because I don't have the strength of dad there, and I've got to come up with consequences. And now he's going to be with me the next 5 days because he's suspended. And what am I going to do? And the Lord just gave me a plan. The first thing I asked the principal is I said, I want him to address every person he stole from because I want him to acknowledge them as a person and that he violated them. And so we came to agreement. He said he can't do that in person because victims don't like that, but he can write a letter to each one. And I said, good, because that's going to happen in those 5 days. And he was required to have counseling, which was great. But he came home and I said to him, you know what? The next 5 days, you and I are stuck together like glue. I cannot trust you. What you've done is you've violated my trust as a parent. And so because of that, you will be with me 24/7, except when you're sleeping or using the restroom. In other words, you will be in my sight. I'm going to treat you like you were 3. Why? Because you have violated trust. And so now I have to narrow the funnel. Typically, we don't have to narrow the funnel, but sometimes in a major incident, we have to go back to narrowing the funnel for a period of time. And so right now, I can't trust you. So your day begins with mine, starting at 5:30 in the morning. We're going to take our 2-mile walk. And then you're going to join me on the bus route. Yes, how humiliating. I was driving a high school route. He was going to have to ride the bus as a high schooler. Now word had gotten out that he had been arrested. He's sitting behind his mother as I'm driving the bus. You know how humiliating that is as a high school boy? It was very humiliating, but that's what he needed. And so every day we got up early, we talked, walked. God began to work in both of our hearts during those precious mornings. And they were difficult at first, but by day 5, they were getting easier. And I saw God begin to change my son's heart in those 5 days. I said, it's going to be a long time before you earn trust. It's probably going to be months before you are allowed to go to anybody's house, to go do anything extracurricular. You just have to know. You have to re-earn your trust. And so the consequences were restricting, but they weren't suffocating. God used that time to reshape our son's heart, to reshape his thinking. And there were other consequences that he had. He had to face Dad after being gone for 3 weeks. We intentionally did not have Doug talk to our son before he flew out the next morning. We could have called Dad, and I did call Dad, and I let Dad know what was going on, but he intentionally did not have conversation with our son because we wanted that to be hanging over his head for 3 weeks. Again, consequence of your choice. And so Dad was gone and came back in 3 weeks, and Dad also just confirmed what I had already done, and we established some boundaries that actually led to our son really changing. Our son is really gifted musically, and he's very gifted with people, and he wrote his first worship song in those 5 days. And every time he would sit down at the piano and play and sing it, I would cry, he would cry, and God did a work in his heart. And now he's a pastor, and he's reaching some incredible people with some incredible stories. Why? Because he can relate to some of the pain and some of the difficulty that people go through. And so God is using him for good.
So this responsibility we have, moms and dads, and grandmas and grandpas, and you know what? If you're an aunt or an uncle, or you're an older brother, an older sister, we're all in this together. And I just love, even you as a church family, we're all helping each other raise each other's kids and loving those kids and establishing the family values, establishing a good role model, and then establishing this authentic faith. It's all working together to help us, especially through the seasons when we might be going through a difficult time. We want to invite you to lower your heads, and Vicki and I are going to pray a quick prayer for you as we turn it back over to the pastor.